Creative power is what moves the world, and Creative Conversations with Irene is a podcast series that offers insight and inspiration on how to thrive in the core essence of who you are as a woman. I'm your host, Irene Chong, and it thrills my heart to see more women awaken and come alive to your feminine intelligence. Listen in for soul and strategy to create your best life ever. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us on social media to receive updates on new episodes. So, hello, Nura. It's so wonderful to have you here. And one of the things that I'd really like to talk about with you is, I was actually inspired by reading your bio, which you can find in the show notes here below. But essentially, you wrote this line, which is that you help heart-centered leaders and change makers embody deeper creative confidence and embodied cyclical living. And I was intrigued by the term creative confidence. And as you know, this podcast series is all about helping women to thrive and live, to co-create with the universe, basically, because it's about claiming our powers as creatrixes. So I would love to hear what you mean when you came up with this idea of creative confidence. So let's just start there. Yeah.
Of course. I love that so much. It is really about claiming our creative power. And that's what I noticed most of the time, most often with people that I work with, which are also predominantly women, that we get these beautiful ideas. We have this soul calling of something that we know that we're here to create, and yet there's all these hangups. And we could talk about money and resources. We could talk about relationships. We could talk about healing. But all of it kept centering for me around self-trust and confidence, which is ultimately, that's what self-trust is. It's confidence. If you look at the root of the word, it's confidente, which comes from Latin, and it means con, with, and fidente, trust. So with trust for ourselves, with trust for how we are meant to create, our unique faculties of creation, our creative flow formula, which is another sort of tagline that I like to use. I love for people to come away knowing, like, this is my unique creative flow formula. It's going to look very different than hers. All are valid, but mine is going to be special because it's unique to me. It's going to take into consideration my natural cycles, my energy level, my unique inner board members, my inner council, my spirit team, all of these things. It's very integrative, but it requires, especially when we are coming out as leaders, or we're coming out, I think we're all, here to be the leader of our own lives. When we're shaping our world in accordance with our soul mission, we really need to have that confidence to take those risks. We need to have the confidence to go after what we know is meant for us, even if we're, surrounded by walls, surrounded by people who doubt us, surrounded by our own past stories and thought forms of doubt. So just feeling the confidence to say, I am a creator, even just that is hugely healing for most people, especially if you come from a background where you hear the word creativity or being a creative, and you kind of pigeonhole it into the really traditional expressions of that, like music, painting, etc., which I love all of those things and I take part of them for myself, but almost in the similar way that I practice yoga for life. It's like I do my creative practice. I play the piano so that I can become more confident in general in the rest of my life. I play with watercolors and painting to become more in flow and honor my intuition and my creative capacity as a human, so that I can then maybe create programs, or I can create energy fields around my relationships. It's more like the traditionally creative practices, for me at least, are an ends or a means to the end of overall confidence in my life, similar to, showing up on your yoga mat is that means to an end of greater balance and harmony in life.
Really beautiful. I love how you've unpacked the idea of confidence. And what I'm really hearing is a message of empowerment. Like creative confidence equates to empowerment because not only did you explain and break down what confidence means, trust with the self, but also the idea that, hey, we are creators of our life. And I'm seeing creativity and leadership related in a way that I hadn't quite seen before. I mean, these are two great ideas, but the idea of like being the leader of your life, you get to create your life, you get to be at cause instead of, being buffeted by winds of change and having to just go along with the crowd. It means that, hey, you get to claim back a certain agency and sovereignty in your life. So I really like this idea. And early on before recording, we were talking about how certain aspects in our chart, and because you are primarily an astrologer and you bring this in and you work with your clients to help them claim back this self-authority. So I'm interested to hear, are there any particular planets that you like to look at in order to help the women that you work with claim back and take back this creative agency in their lives?
Absolutely. We can always look at everything in the chart, of course, but if you want to tune into usually where people have the most creative block and story or resistance around the creative journey, we can look at Venus. Venus has so much information because she is the planet of our divine feminine, our emerging divine feminine. There's an element that we're learning how to embody and become with Venus. It's not always fully situated. We tend to have to lean into Venus a little bit more. We are usually a little bit more comfortable with our moon,
Mm.
and we're learning to extend or grow into our Venus a little bit more, and then eventually find that beautiful synthesis between our whole chart. So Venus is the divine feminine, but she's also how we receive, how we attract, also how we feel about what we attract. And in general, if you have the experience of wanting something, Venus will show how you will react if you do or don't get what you want. It's really interesting to watch. And she's also how we receive, which is really important. So she is our creative initiation journey because all of those elements of attraction, receiving, as well as knowing how we are resourced to create, how we are resourced to connect. This is going to overlap in our creative initiation journey as well as our relationship initiation journey. And so there's always a really interesting tie between our creative process and our relationships. So many women that I talk to, often the story is, I don't have time to connect with myself in this way. And then the next question I ask, well, it's, who is telling you that? Or who are the people in your life that are needing your time? If you're a parent, a caregiver, if you have a full-time job, it's your bosses or your colleagues, like who are the other people involved in your creative process? And that's also going to connect back to Venus and your relationships with them. So there's always this self-claiming element with Venus. Nobody is going to necessarily push us into our destiny. We have to really claim that. And it's the same with the reemergence of the divine feminine on the planet, especially if we're in a culture where we're still doing a lot of healing and deconditioning work where the feminine has been silenced and repressed. So we typically have to do a little bit more intentional effort where Venus comes because she's usually the first part of our psyche or our inner board member that is a little bit silenced. So we need to go back and actively connect with her. So there's so many beautiful ways that we can do that. Just using astrology is, for one, tuning into where do you have Venus? What sign is she in? That's going to show you the quality of the resources that she has for you, and also the resources that you're meant to connect with. If you just put a little bit of effort into that part of your experience, you're going to receive so much. Where we have Venus, she's also teaching us how to receive. So for me, I can give my example. I have Venus in Scorpio in the seventh house. And so for me, I've had to learn a lot about receiving from and with others. And of course, my work centers around empowerment, and that's a central resource of Scorpio. It's about empowerment. So I had to go through a whole journey of reclaiming my power. And then because of my journey, I was able to spot, oh, these are the typical pitfalls that happen when you're on an empowerment journey. So now I'm more resourced to help other people in their process of reclaiming power. So there's even just starting with that is a lot to go off of.
Beautiful. Well, you've said so much there that just thrills my heart. Number one, right, the whole idea of the reclamation and awakening, arising to our divine feminine. I do find that Venus is such a core planet for that. All the qualities that you mentioned are very, very dear to me as like feminine principles, receptivity. What is it that we magnetize and attract? Qualities of looking at what it is that matters most to us. Because when I think of Venus, I think the one word that comes to mind is value. Value as both a noun and a verb. So, what is it that is precious to us? What we are attracted to is what we find as valuable. And as you so rightly pointed out, I think a lot of women struggle with this. And I think the reason why we can find it so hard to receive is because we don't value ourselves enough. We don't sit fully in our self-worth, that we feel that I'm worthy and deserving of receiving, whatever it is that we desire. And also value as what is most important and precious to us. So I was speaking to what it is that we value as a verb, but also what values or principles are important to us, and this is how we live our lives. I also really appreciate the example you gave of having Venus and Scorpio in the seventh house, because Venus is also a very relational planet. So it's interesting that you have it in the seventh house and that you're learning how to do it. Um, let's break that down even further, because I find that there's so much richness in this. If someone is interested in figuring out what is it that I truly value, besides knowing the Venus and their signs, I'm guessing that also certain aspects may be significant. And are there any special ones that stand out to you that come to mind? Yeah.
Well, absolutely. The aspects are going to bring in the relationships with the other parts of the self. So other parts of the chart are going to be illuminated, whether that's through a conjunction or squares, oppositions, trines. And so I tend to look at where we have the conjunction, square, and opposition as where we maybe have some tension. The conjunction is interesting because it's going to depend on the planet involved. So sometimes it can be a difficult, partnering where they're kind of warring for attention, like two siblings, they want the same plate, right? Silly things like that. But, there's this fighting for attention in that one area. And so you typically have to separate them out a little bit and understand, okay, well, what does this planet need? And what does this planet need? How can we have them have a conversation with each other to get to the essence that they actually both want the same thing, but they might have a different strategy of doing it. Every planet has its own strategy and way of going after what is needed, even if they're all board members for your same soul purpose, your same soul mission, they're going to have different ways that they suggest is the most efficient or best way, right? So we want to be clear on, well, what are the functions of each of the planets and how would they naturally talk with each other? Are they going to agree? A good example could be between Venus and Saturn. Venus really wants things to be really beautiful and easeful and flowy and harmonious. Venus knows that her role is to embody the feminine and receive, really embody that yin energy of allowing what she requires to come to her. And there's patience and there's waiting. And there's also knowing how to gently manipulate to attract more of what you need as well. But Saturn is going to say, well, you need to work hard to get what you want. This needs to be a little bit of a struggle. Maybe there's this mastery of a certain skill set that has to come in before you're able to attract and receive what you need. So Saturn's really going to have you look at things in a very practical way. And so if, say, you have Venus square Saturn, well, there's going to be a little bit of tension between, okay, Venus says, oh, we get to let this be easy. We get to just be all flow. And then Saturn says, but you got to work for it. You have to wake up earlier. You're going to have to schedule things. You're going to have to maybe take this course. You're going to have to put in some work. So it can be really wonderful. That's how we start to, especially in sessions, we can kind of put everything together in a way of like, okay, you have these different strategies within you. They're going to perhaps work more efficiently in different areas of your life and also at different times. If we're going through a transit where, one planet is being highly activated, then that planet tends to need to take more of the lead at that time. And this is where we come into being cyclical beings. It's never just one strategy that's working the whole time. It's always shifting. This is why it's so important to and valuable and beneficial to know, well, who are you and your walking imprint of your chart, and then how are the cosmos influencing you, or what's the play off of your energy that's happening with the current transits. So if we even just bring all of that back to the creative confidence piece, you can use all of this as information, as a strategy to tune into, okay, this is the part of me that really needs to take the lead right now. This is the part of me that needs support. This is the part of me that is wanting healing. This is the part of me that needs a break. We don't have to lead with all parts of ourselves all the time, but it really creates just awareness for greater discernment so that we can really honor our energy and not burn out.
Yeah, and this is where I see really that astrology is such an empowering tool because of the level of awareness it can give us. And it's also a reminder that just as the planets are moving and they have their own cycles, we as human beings here on planet Earth, we have our own cycles as well. So you bring all this in so beautifully, and it's very, very rich. And I'm thinking just as a playful sort of experiment, because this is the first time we're actually connecting face to face. We've had email exchanges, but it's really the first time we are getting to interact in this way. And I know, for example, that you've taken a look at my chart. So why don't we break it down and have a concrete example based on what you can see from my chart and focusing specifically on Venus? Like how would you help someone like me embody more creative confidence?
I love this. Thank you for this beautiful challenge. So, your Venus in Sagittarius at the top of your chart, conjunct Mercury, that's the first place that I would actually tune into because communication is so important for you. Of course, we're recording a podcast, and of course, this is central to your work. There's this element of expanding your horizons, which is a very Sagittarian quality through connecting with women and communicating with women, perhaps around themes of freedom and expansion and possibility. I always say Sagittarius is the possibility posse. I'm so here for it. So that would be a central element. And I would perhaps ask you, how have you had to um, come to terms with that big mission? Because that's a big mission. It's also at the top of your chart, which suggests that it's very prominent for you. You have a lot to live into in terms of these big, expansive conversations about women's freedom and maybe even themes of rewilding and reconnecting with our natural self and our truth and really giving women a platform to speak truth.
It's so interesting, and you've hit the nail on the head because I also have my Venus in opposition to my moon, which is right down below, right? And for the
I
longest
was going to
time,
go there next.
yeah, for
Yeah.
the longest time, I wanted to stay hidden. And I'm a very private person. So to be visible and to come out and speak my truth it's been quite a journey. I think like you, I really had to live into and embody my Venus to come to a point in my life where I say, okay, there's this mission that I feel that is bigger than me, that is more than just about me. So I want to come out and share that message. And that was what really drove me. But for the longest time, because of that opposition, it was a challenge, a huge, huge, huge challenge for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the next place I was going to go because typically we're more comfortable in the moon. We tend to embody our moon until we're at the very least, 12, 13, going through puberty. That's really, if we look at our personality as a child, we tend to be very lunar. And it makes a lot of sense. We're close to the mother, and the moon is mother. And the moon is also what we've mastered across lifetimes. The moon is our medicine. We're so naturally good at our moon to the point that it becomes a little bit of a comfort zone sometimes. And this is actually, it's a bit of a tangent, but it feels important here. So, if you're ever tuned into the north and south node of the moon, that's why the north node has this invitation to new ways of expressing self, new ways of evolving. And the south node tends to be validation traps where we get stuck and hung up in patterns. And so, the south node and the moon tend to be where we're very comfortable. And we're usually learning how to be fully seen, appreciated, and validated for our moon. And then we feel ready and equipped and prepared to step more into Venus. And for a lot of women, that doesn't necessarily happen in our teen years. That can happen much, much later. A lot of times we can require living into our moon first for the first half of our lives and feeling fully validated as our all of our lunar themes become healed so that we're ready to now step into the Venus, because that's the thing. If we want to feel confident, we kind of need to have some playful energy. We need to have that ability to take risks. But taking risks and feeling very playful is sort of the antithesis of safety, especially when you're trying to build safety. So it's like we need to feel really safe in ourselves first, which is the moon, and then we feel ready to take those relational and creative risks. So it seems like that was a bit of your story as well.
Mm, absolutely. And I feel that right there, you have given such a beautiful explanation of how it works because you tuned into, and that was why I wanted to use my chart as an example, because you've tuned into Venus in the sign that it's in, which is Sagittarius. You've tuned into its aspect. In this case, it's the conjunction it has to Mercury. And then that tension, that opposition to my moon. And you're so right in saying that I think for a lot of women, there's that aspect of wanting to stay in our comfort zone. Well, actually, this is, I think, a universal theme that anyone watching this would be able to relate to. But then to step into what it is that we truly value, that we feel called to step to embody more fully, that can be a stretch and a growth edge. I really appreciate what you mentioned about the idea of cyclical living, because one of the things that I think the shadow side of Venus can be comparison and envy when we see another woman doing something and we kind of go like, oh, I want that too. And this reminder that, hey, we all have different cycles, just like we all have different charts and different placements. There are all these unique configurations that are special to us. But if we don't know what it is and we don't own and claim that as unique to us, then we could actually find ourselves living this vicious cycle of always wanting what other people, the projections that are out there, because we haven't quite fully embodied that yet. So I think you pointed to something really important there, that we each have our unique rhythms and cycles, and that in divine right timing is the way I like to put it, we'll be able to step into that phase in our lives that is unique and special for us.
So much. There, I have a favorite saying. It could be said either way, that safety is sovereignty or that sovereignty is safety, because no matter what, when you feel so safe within yourself, it's safe in all of the senses, safe to be who you are, safe to love yourself. I find more often than not, because a lot of people will come to me saying, I'm not sure who I am, I'm not sure what I want. But the most common story is that that was either repressed from a young age. That there was a time when you definitely did know what you wanted and it was really natural. You didn't even necessarily need to put it into words because it was already so embodied. You just did it. You just were naturally magnetized to what you wanted. And then, we come into our society and we kind of have to adapt and be, more molded according to what is needed. And then we come, hopefully, often to this time later in life when we realize, oh, I can shake off that molding. I received what I needed to from that conditioning. I can return to self. I can come back to my true self. But there's this idea that sometimes stays with us because of that conditioning, like, oh, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I want. But it's usually that we're learning to feel safe enough to just honor that we already do know who we are and that we already do know what we want and that it's safe to want what we want. And so there's always a story in the chart around what that might look like. It's going to be different for everybody, but maybe Mars comes into play as well when it comes to our desire nature. And then we're coming back to Venus with, okay, now how do I value myself enough to receive that? Now, how do I come back to my moon? Okay, what does safety look like for me? But ultimately, coming back to that, safety is sovereignty and sovereignty is safety. It's this awareness that no matter what, somebody can have a different opinion, even, difficult physical things can happen in life, but you're still here, you're strong enough to move through it. There's this resilience piece as well. And so I always love to look into the chart and tune into like, how can I strengthen each of these parts and really play to the strengths of everything? And then I look at transits to tune into, well, what is being strengthened and what it would be in my best interest to just go with the flow, to not resist what is needing to be strengthened. So, for example, right now, all of us, Saturn is currently in Pisces, and there's this element of needing some fortification there, some strengthening, some grounding, some mastery. And so the sign of Pisces is the sign of the mystic, the dreamer, the healer. And in terms of the collective, it's really something to do with our collective healing, reconnecting with our compassion for humanity, surrendering to the major changes happening in the world, maybe doing some grief healing because there's a lot of really intense things happening. And Pisces can tap into the grief and the suffering of humanity, as well as the ecstasy and bliss and joy of humanity. Pisces taps into the whole range of the human experience and is able to hold loving space for that. But there's this element also in the shadow of it of escapism or illusions or being overly lost in fantasy, or perhaps even, life and the world can feel very painful. So we feel like we need to take a retreat and back out of it. Or perhaps we're coming into a spiritual experience where that's, we're asking why are these things happening? That question tends to bring us into a spiritual path of some sort. And so Saturn is suggesting, take all of this, sit with it, let it be hard, let it make you stronger, let it improve your intuition, come into your intuitive mastery. Instead of trying to escape, why not take it and use it to become stronger or more resilient? So that's really something that all of us are being asked to strengthen. And so that's one example of a bigger cycle that we're all part of. And that's just one of, the planets. And then there's, everybody's going to be maybe at a different part in their own cycle. We have all of us have a Saturn return around 29 to 31. And then again, 30 years ish later, we also have a Venus cycle. We have one of the easiest cycles to track is the solar return cycle. So it's our birthday. We have one of those every year. We're going to have the sun moving through all of the different parts of our chart once per year. So there's so many cycles that we find ourselves in, and it's really helpful to see, what are the micro cycles and the macro cycles, and how can I leverage these? How can I just attune to them, especially if I'm feeling, I'm not fully sure what to do, or I'm not sure my next creative step. Well, we have all of these beautiful navigational tools that can help us identify that.
Mm, beautiful. You said so much here, and I'm gonna attempt to consolidate it around the idea of safety, because I think that that's such a key piece around embodied expression and women who really want to step up into a higher level of creative leadership of their lives. So I think let me just spiral back to the very first point that you made around safety and sovereignty, how it needn't necessarily be in opposition to each other. And so just to use my chart as an example, when you pointed out that Venus is in opposition to Moon, I found that a huge part of my journey was feeling safe to be visible. And that took a long while. I really had to lean into both my lunar cycle and figure out what I could rest on, what I could anchor myself in. So I found that for quite a period of time, just following my lunar rhythms and tuning in, leaning into my menstrual cycle as well, that was huge for me. And then eventually dipping my toes into the Venus cycle, becoming more comfortable with her, understanding my strengths and my gifts and what it was that I valued, so that I could then step up and step out. But I felt that it was very much a journey that was rewarding because, you mentioned that with squares and oppositions, there is tension. But when mastered, there is also structure. So that to me is was like the positive endpoint. And I'm still continuing to master and learn and grow from it. Because with that tensile strength, sometimes it's like right now, I have a podcast with, a comfortable audience size. But the idea of growing and expanding, which is very Sagittarian to me, whilst I find it thrilling and exciting, I realize I need to balance that out with my need for comfort and safety as well. So it's about regulating, making sure that my nervous system is regulated, that I don't overstretch myself too much. And then I burn out and I go out of whack, which is the opposite of the embodied cyclical living that you promote, right? Um, and then I love that you brought in Saturn in Pisces because so many questions that I want to ask you about that. But it also got me to think, you brought out this idea of the micro and macro. Micro being we have our own natal chart, we have our own personal cycles that we can look at, but also on a larger collective, present day understanding, there are also all these transits that affect humanity as a whole. So the way I see it is one of the questions that I get a lot from my clients are, like, oh, is it too late for me? And because you brought up this idea of, hey, there's a Saturn cycle, which is about every 27, 28 years. There's a Venus cycle as well. There's a Mars cycle as well. What I love about the feminine is that to me, there's this beautiful spiral, i.e., we always get another chance, another opportunity. So, for example, let's just look at Saturn since you brought that up. If there are challenges in it at one phase of your life, say when you're 27, 28, there's another opportunity to have, I wouldn't say a redo, but it's almost like another opportunity to build a stronger foundation this time around the time of when you're like, am I right? I hope my math is right, 56. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm there.
Yeah, plus they're also in between the Saturn returns, there are also Saturn oppositions and the squares to Saturn, in which you can continue to build more structure and resilience, as you mentioned. So this idea of cycles, again, because we're having a limited time, and I'm thinking, well, this is very Saturnian. We have to keep within a structure in a container. But if we could give the viewers who are watching this one tip in which they can right away apply. You mentioned attuning to their Venus cycle, for instance, figuring out where their Venus placement is. Are there any other tips, say, in relation to Saturn or any other planet, in which you feel that would be useful and helpful? If someone who's watching this is thinking, okay, how can I step up into becoming more of a co-creator of my life versus being a victim or someone who is just passively letting life flow by?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many, but so tuning into Venus, I love to do any sort of embodiment practice around that. So, really tuning into for yourself, okay, well, what are my values? How am I already living a value driven life, and how can I allow in more? How can I receive more? And just let that be part of your conversation that you're having with yourself. Just continually bring it to the fore of the conversation, especially with the people that you're talking to. Let people know about it. It's so much easier to actually receive something when people around you know that you need it. And that is such a simple thing, but we tend to have all sorts of misconceptions around, oh, people are already going to know that I need it. It's like maybe they don't know. Maybe they have no idea that you need it. And maybe they're the literal perfect person who has what you need. And all you need to do is ask. It's typically asking for more with Venus and really building up the inner strength to know you're totally worthy of asking for more in whatever that looks like, whether that's more support, more time, more resources, whatever it is. And then if we look to Saturn, for those of us who need more support with creating healthy structure and foundation in our lives, I actually love to use the essence of Saturn, which is time, to support me. So very simple things like scheduling and creating timers and budgeting. Like it can sound boring, but it actually contributes to that sense of safety. So imagine, you want to spend more time in your creative process, but something you struggle with is having enough time. Well, what's an amount of time, 20 or 30 minutes that you can commit to every day? Saturn loves the word commitment, by the way. It's what are you dedicated to? In what way will you commit? It's really a guarantee. It's almost like if you tune into, okay, well, what creates a master? It's like 10,000 hours of something or 10 years, right? Like there are these measurable quantities that if you just spend that much time doing something, you do get better at it. Saturn is very cut and dry that way. It's what you put in, you get out. So
Mm.
you will master something with Saturn. So if there's something that's really near and dear to your heart in your creative process that, you do the valuing work to make it clear that that's a priority for you. And then you just set a timer. I'm going to sit with this 30 minutes a day or a week or whatever you can give to yourself. And use that structured space to create that safety for you to play. And then, you shut it off. You honor the boundary. You honor what you have set forth in your structure. So that's a really great way to tune into Saturn. And I do think in general, if you're newer to astrology, tuning into the moon is always so helpful because the moon is the mood. The moon can really show us so much about our emotional understanding, where our energy is, where our emotions are on a given day, and how they might relate with the people around us. And so even doing, tracking on an app is really wonderful, but even better, going outside, tuning into, okay, well, where does the moon rise and set in my sky around me? And how am I feeling in the different parts of her cycle? I think it's the perfect way to learn astrology and get that connection of like, this is not just an idea of a cycle, this is a real natural cycle that's happening that you're also part of. It's not something that's pretend or made up by humans, right? This is just an observation of truth. So, how do you want to relate with that? So, anytime in any way that you can, I suggest being outside and connecting with the stars and the sky in that way. With Venus right now, she is a morning star. And so you can tune in with her early in the morning and send your prayers directly to her and have conversations with her. She like whether this is congruent with your beliefs or your practices. You can send a prayer to Venus or just asking for support. Venus, what would you have me know right now around what would be supportive for me in my creative or relational practices? And then same thing in the next half of the cycle, she'll be an evening star. So you kind of want to check in, is she a morning star right now or an evening star? So there's a lot of really fun ways. But I think it's just more than anything, having a relationship with these planets. And they are ultimately reminders of having a relationship with the different parts of ourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really wanted to highlight that idea of relationship because what you were saying, especially towards the end, was about cultivating a relationship, that it's not just, I don't know what the word is, but it's not just like, okay, seeing in a very logical way, this is happening now, and so this is what I should be doing. It feels a lot more poetic than just, a very logical, structured way. What I also really appreciate was how you gave three tips by looking at Venus, Saturn, and the moon, having clarity around your values, bringing structure in, having that container, because I think of Venus as feminine flow, but then you also need that Saturnian devotion and commitment to see things through. And then finally, like attuning to yourself, your moon, your rhythms, and honoring and having reverence for that. So these three elements I feel are like a perfect foundational step for someone who is new to astrology. I also really appreciate how you broke it down. So, for example, I think you mentioned for someone who is still new and learning, the lunar cycle is one of the easiest one because it's so visible in the night sky, and there are tons of lunar apps out there to help you track. And then to dive in even deeper, I think Venus would be wonderful. It's slightly more technical and complex because, as you mentioned, there's the morning phase, the evening phase, plus its cycle is it's about 19 months. So it takes longer to track. But it's also extremely rewarding once you get a hang of it. And then finally with Saturn, a much longer cycle, but we have our entire lifetime to live and embody that. So on that note, I just want to say I'm in deep appreciation of the wisdom that is coming through here. It's so rich. Usually when I'm on these podcasts, I tend to say quite a lot, but this time around, I just found myself just wanting to stay quiet and listen to what you have to say because it's really been so rich and insightful. Unfortunately, we have to end here. I'm most definitely going to have another interview with you because I feel that we only just begun. There are so many other questions I wanted to ask you, but that will be for another time. For now, thank you so much for being here with us, Nura, and blessings to you.
Thank you so much, Irene. Infinite blessings to all of you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and that you'll be taking away nourishing gems to create a more joyful and fulfilling life, because that's what it's all about. If you liked what you heard, do give a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and let me know your takeaways and reflections. Till next time, remember to light up the world with your beauty and creativity.